You being gone would be the best gift. That's what my daughter said to me. And I remember the exact moment because my body reacted before my mind did. A tightening in my chest, a quiet ringing in my ears, the kind of silence that happens when something lands too heavy to respond to right away. And I looked at her and said, okay. And at the time, I don't think she believed me. Even though I'm telling this now with distance, with time, with a lot of quiet miles between who I was then and who I am now. Back then, I was a 54-year-old man who had spent most of his adult life doing one thing, showing up every day, no applause, no backup, just consistency, and I raised my daughter alone from the time she was 7 because her mother left abruptly, met someone at work, packed up, moved across the country, with no dramatic final fight, no long explanation, just gone, and for the first few years she sent birthday cards, maybe 3, and after that, nothing, silence so completed eventually. Stop surprising me. So it was just me and a kid who needed everything. And I became everything. And I worked as a civil engineer for over 2 decades at the same firm. Not because it was my dream job, but because it was stable, predictable, with health insurance and a paycheck that arrived when it was supposed to. And I turned down promotions that required travel, passed on opportunities that meant long hours or uncertainty, telling myself there would be time later, until later became a habit I stopped questioning. I cooked, helped with homework, sat through school plays and parent-teacher meetings, learned how to braid hair badly and how to listen quietly when she didn't want solutions, just space. And I didn't date much, and when I did, it never lasted, because she always came first, and that felt right at the time, especially since I grew up poor, actually poor, with free lunches, clothes that never fit right because they already belonged to someone else, sharing a bedroom with 2 brothers and learning early how to make yourself small. I promised myself my kid would never feel that way. So I saved every bonus, every tax return, every extra dollar I didn't need to spend, splitting it between my retirement and her future, and by the time she finished high school there was enough set aside for college, not luxury, but security, and she got into a solid state university a few hours away as a business major with a finance concentration. And I was proud in a quiet way, the first in our family to do it. And I didn't say much because I didn't need to. The first couple of years were normal, with calls on Sunday evenings, pictures of dorm rooms and cafeteria food, complaints about professors, and I paid tuition directly, sent her a monthly allowance, covered her car insurance, phone, everything I reasonably could. And it was a stretch, but I managed, until things started to shift in junior year when she started dating someone I never met, but heard about constantly. His family's house, vacations, connections, always with an undertone like facts. I was supposed to absorb and adjust to. Suddenly what I provided wasn't enough. Her car was embarrassing even though it was a perfectly reliable Honda I'd bought used in good condition. Her allowance didn't go far enough, so I increased it slightly even though it meant tightening my own budget further. And when she compared me to his parents, what they gave him and what they could afford, I didn't argue or defend myself. I just went quiet, thinking it was a phase. Until Christmas came. She was home for 2 weeks technically, but in reality she slept in her childhood room maybe 4 nights, spent the rest of the time elsewhere. And when she was home she was on her phone, present but not really there. Every conversation feeling like an interruption. And I tried anyway, planning a dinner, buying gifts I knew she wanted, a new laptop, clothes she'd mentioned, a gift card so she could enjoy herself. Watching her open them and waiting for something, a smile, a spark, anything. She said, thanks, flat and polite, like I was a cashier handing her a receipt, and I told myself not to take it personally. Told myself she was tired, young, growing, because that's what parents do. We explain things away, and a couple days before she was set to leave I asked if she might come home for spring break. Maybe we could go somewhere together, just us. But she didn't look up from her phone, already having other plans. Summer 2, an internship, time at someone else's lake house. I asked when I'd see her. And that's when she finally looked at me, annoyed, saying I was clingy, suffocating, that I needed to get my own life. And then she said it, the words that landed heavier than anything else she'd said before. You being gone would be the best gift. I stood there, holding onto the counter, letting it settle, and she tried to walk it back halfway. But the words were already out, heavy and clear, and I finished cooking in silence while she ate distractedly and then disappeared into her room. And I sat alone at the table long after the food went cold, thinking about everything I'd postponed, everything I'd traded away quietly without ever saying it out loud. And that night something shifted. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity, and the next morning I made a decision that would change everything. The morning after that conversation, I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had somewhere to be, but because my mind wouldn't let me sleep anymore. And there's a moment sometimes when exhaustion turns into something sharper, not burnout exactly, more like recognition, when you finally see your life clearly without the justifications layered over it. And I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where I'd been sitting the night before. Same chair, same light coming through the window. Everything familiar, but not feeling the same. I opened my laptop and logged into my accounts, and her education fund was still there, smaller than it used to be after 3 years of tuition, but substantial. Money I'd saved slowly and deliberately over almost 2 decades. Money I'd always thought of as untouchable and already spent in my mind. And I stared at the number for a long time before calling my company's HR department to ask about early retirement options. Not dramatizing it or explaining myself, just asking what was possible. It turned out that at my age, with my tenure, I could leave and the pension would be reduced. Yes, but survivable and manageable, not comfortable but real. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I'd avoided. What do I actually want? And I transferred the money, all of it, every remaining dollar from the college account into my retirement. The action quiet, just clicks and confirmations. No ceremony or thunderbolt, but my hands were steady the entire time. Then I called the university and told them I wouldn't be making the upcoming payment, asked them to remove my name from any future billing. And the woman on the phone sounded surprised, and then professional, and she didn't ask why because she didn't need to. And after that I searched for something I'd once dreamed about, and then filed away under impossible, long-term travel, and I found a program that handled everything: flights, lodging, logistics, 12 months across multiple countries. It wasn't cheap, but for the first time in my adult life the money was mine, and I booked it the same day. And when my daughter left for school the next morning, I hugged her like I always did and didn't say anything about what I'd done or warn her, because I wasn't trying to make a point. I was just done explaining myself. And the next 2 weeks were a blur of practical things as I submitted retirement paperwork, gave notice at work, listed the house, packed decades into boxes, kept what mattered, and let the rest go. Then the calls started, and the university contacted her about the unpaid tuition, and she called me in a rage, screaming and demanding explanations, and I answered calmly, reminded her of what she'd said, told her I was leaving the country for a year, that the house was sold, that she was on her own now. And when she said I couldn't do this, I told her I already had, and then the chorus joined in: relatives, people absent for years, her partner's family, even her mother accusing me of abandonment. I didn't argue or defend myself, and I repeated the same sentence over and over, that she asked for space and I was giving it to her. And a few days before my flight, she drove back to the house. Only it wasn't our house anymore. New people lived there, they didn't know her, and they asked her to leave. She called me, hysterical, and I told her where I was, that her childhood home was gone, that most of what was inside had been sold or donated. Though I'd kept photos and a few sentimental things, the rest, things are just things, and she accused me of losing my mind. But I told her I'd found it, and then she cried, saying she didn't mean it, that she was stressed, that she needed me, that she loved me. And I listened without interrupting, and when she asked about the money, I told her the truth: it was gone. She asked how she was supposed to finish school, and I said the same way millions of people do. Then she hung up, and by the time my plane took off, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because everything was resolved, but because, for once, I wasn't carrying it alone. And when I landed in my first country, I sat at a small cafe, holding a cup of coffee I hadn't rushed through, watching people pass by who didn't know me and didn't need anything from me. For the first time in a long time, my life felt like it belonged to me. And back home, she was beginning to learn what life looked like without the safety net she'd mistaken for permanence. Because travel has a way of slowing your thoughts down whether you want it to or not. And when you're no longer surrounded by familiar routines, your mind stops racing ahead and starts circling back. As I spent long afternoons walking cities where no one knew my name, sitting on benches watching ordinary life unfold in languages I didn't speak, and it gave me space, not the kind you ask for in anger, but the kind that lets things finally settle. Back home, things didn't settle quickly. and I didn't hear from my daughter directly for a while. What I learned came secondhand through my brother, who tried to stay neutral but couldn't hide the concern in his voice, as she'd had to withdraw for a semester. Tuition deadlines don't pause for emotional fallout, and she couldn't come up with the money fast enough, so she moved into her partner's family guest space, took a retail job, applied for loans, and adjusted, poorly at first, to a life where help wasn't automatic, and I won't pretend hearing that didn't hurt. No matter how old your child gets, there's a reflex in you that wants to fix things, to step in, to make it easier, and I felt it every time my phone buzzed, even when it wasn't her, but I stayed where I was, not out of spite, out of necessity, and a few weeks into my trip, I started getting calls from people I'd never spoken to before, her partner, his parents, voices full of certainty about what I should do, about who I was supposed to be, and one of them even suggested legal action, which almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it showed how little they understood that the money had never been hers. It had always been mine, offered freely and freely withdrawn. Once that reality settled in, the calls stopped, apparently because the stories she'd been telling others didn't survive contact with facts, and her relationship didn't either. I don't know all the details and I don't need to. But what I do know is that when the assumption of endless support disappeared, so did a lot of certainty in her life, not just about me, but about the people she thought would replace me. And about 2 months into my travels, I received an email from her, which wasn't short or rushed, and you could tell she'd rewritten it multiple times. She apologized for what she said, explained the stress she'd been under, acknowledged that she'd been unfair, and then she said something that made me pause. She said my leaving had traumatized her, and I read that word several times. I didn't respond right away. I took days, walked, thought, let myself feel everything without reacting. And when I finally wrote back, I kept it simple, honest, maybe for the first time in our relationship, truly honest, and I told her about the choices I'd made. Quietly over the years, the opportunities I'd passed on, and the ways I'd shaped my entire life around being available. I didn't accuse her, I didn't blame her, I just stated facts, and I told her that when she said my absence would be a gift, something broke, not in anger, but in understanding, that I realized I'd taught her unintentionally, that my role was to provide endlessly, without limits or needs of my own, and I told her I wasn't disappearing forever, but I wasn't coming back to what we had either. And if we were going to have a relationship, it would be different. No money, no leverage, no guilt, just mutual respect, or nothing at all. And I told her I'd be back in 10 months. She hasn't replied yet, and some days that hurts more than I expect it to. Other days it feels like exactly what needs to happen, because growth isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it looks like silence. And as for me, I've continued on. I've learned how little I actually need to be content. I wake up curious again. I talk to strangers without checking the time. I eat slowly. I sleep deeply. And for the first time in decades, my life isn't organized around someone else's needs. Which doesn't mean I stopped being a father. It means I finally became a person again. I don't know what things will look like when I return. I don't know if she'll be ready, or if I will, but I do know this. I won't trade my entire self away ever again, not even for love. And sometimes distance isn't punishment. Sometimes it's the only way everyone involved gets the chance to grow. And whatever happens next, I'm at peace knowing that this time, when I chose myself, it wasn't abandonment, it was balance.